you may want to take some time, and you may want to do some social history and physical examination and tests, and then, and only then, do you have enough information in order to establish a treatment plan. What I will suggest to you is that our assessment is intervention and can be intervention in the psychological realm. The way that we intervene will change the nature of the problem. The way that we intervene will change the phenomenology of the problem, and that intervention itself can be sufficient. Assessment itself can be sufficient for intervention. Assessment and diagnosis. Diagnosis implying pathology, assessment being an orientation to what are the strengths and weaknesses, what is available in the system, not just what is part of human pathology. So I had a little assessment exercise here. Let's see if we do this in reverse order because of the fact that we only have at 5 aspects of assessment and how that will help us to provide and to generate treatment. We're going to look at a phenomenological orientation to assessment. We're going to look at a technique that my wife Lillian and I do very often, which is sculpting, but different than the kind of sculpting that Virginia Satir might do. We do therapist sculpting. So we're going to orient into this world of therapist sculpting as it can impact addiction. Then we're going to look at one intervention that is a kind of latch skeleton key intervention, an intervention that I use for addictions that may be even contentless. You don't even need to know what the addiction is in order to be able to do this assessment, and that's called How Do You Know? Then we're going to look at some of the strategic questions and use smoking control as a model. How can our questions that we ask during the interview be strategic in the sense of being a little bit like computer virus or a little bit like a solvent, so that we can dissolve some of the threads that join the addiction or the habit together. And by virtue of asking these strategic questions, we can begin to loosen some of those threads. And then also we can do a little exercise with using video descriptions to understand the kind of outcome-oriented thinking that we might do. So these are 5 loosely related aspects of an experiential phenomenological assessment, and that's where I'm going to take us on this excursion over the workshop. So the question has just occurred to me that I might want to start in a little bit different way and might want to start with this idea of sculpting. Yes, Jeff.
Can I just ask you whether you make a distinction between habits and addiction?
Do I make a distinction between habits and addiction? Yeah, because, the addiction has the tolerance, right? So you have to, you need more and more when it comes to the addiction. And the habit would be like smoking, I consider a habit because it's not, the tolerance is not there. You don't need more and more of the drug. It's hard to sometimes discriminate and say one thing is a habit and one thing is an addiction. Like nail biting would be a habit and not an addiction. And trichotillomania would be a habit and not an addiction. But not having a really good, I didn't know exactly how to make the distinction, so I just lumped them together. Question?
Well, within that, though, when you say that still, I think, progressively, if you first start smoking, you're only going to be able to take so much before you,
Right, when you first start smoking, it's horrible.
After a while, you just...
Right, after a while, it's second nature.
Same with, you get anxious at first, you start using the trichotillomania, anything like that. Well, eventually, you're going to do it more and more often. It's going to build up.
Yeah, the point is that you will, right. So 99% of human habits are good. And unfortunately, 1% of human habits are bad. So the human system is geared towards making things automatic. Like at one time, in order to speak, you had to say dink, wah, wah. And you had to think about putting together all of those concepts to say that you wanted a drink of water. Dink, wah, wah. And then now you speak and you don't have to think about what it is and how you're going to construct words and what the grammar is going to be. And when you're driving a car, you have to think. Now, I drink Japanese green tea, but a few weeks in Japan acclimated me to the idea of drinking Japanese green tea, and I don't drink coffee. And so now I've developed a taste for Japanese green tea, and I can discriminate between, different forms of Japanese green tea, and now it's become a habit that I like the taste. I've acquired the taste. And so I suppose that if I drank scotch, which I don't, but after a while I would acquire a taste for that, and I'd be able to discriminate between the different kinds of scotch, and then I would, want that, and that would become a habit. But most of our habits, they're very adaptive, and they're just ways in which we don't have to make things conscious, and they can happen automatically. Then the habits that cause us anxiety or stress or social discord, those are the ones that people seek out help for. So I don't even have a really good discrimination between a positive habit and a negative habit, and a positive addiction and a negative addiction. Just that there are plenty of things that are positive addictions in the world that we just love. And I play bridge. I read bridge every single day, and it's a positive addiction. And if you have a few bridge players during the break and a deck of cards, I'd be glad to play a few hands. So those are, it doesn't get me into social problems, and it's just become an interesting habit, and it's wonderful to do, and I enjoy it. So I don't know where else to take that except to emphasize this philosophy that 99% of habits are good, 99% of addictions are good. And the negative ones are the ones that we're focusing on here, the ones that get us into trouble. Other questions or questions from the keynote that are left over? I get on a march, and so anytime we can share. So anytime that you have questions or concerns or comments or critique, please just come in and ask away. It will be perfectly fine. Let's enter into this world of sculpting. And because I like workshops that are more experiential than didactic, and because we do have these 30 minutes in which to do this exercise, the other exercise will take us a little bit longer. Let's do this, and Lillian will help me, right? Okay, so because Lillian and I do so much work together, Lillian's my wife, and she has this charming Brazilian accent. So what we're going to do is to just work in pairs. And then what we're going to do is something that is a little bit, just a little bit rudimentary. And this is a little bit like learning to ski, something that I know nothing about, because I didn't grow up in a skiing country, so that particular social grace escaped me. So a few years ago, not so many years ago, I'm on the top of the Zugspitze, the highest mountain in Germany, and I'm there with a ski instructor, and I'm on skis, and I'm thinking, where are the brakes? And what do you do, and how do people manage this? And it's a little bit incomprehensible to me, so the ski instructor gives me an instruction, and the first instruction he gives me is, fall down. Now, this seemed like a very easy thing to do and well within my capabilities, so I fell down. And then he instructed me, this is how to get up. Now, that seemed like very useful information. So we practiced fall down, get up, fall down, get up, fall down, get up, until I had some competency at this skill. Now I felt a little bit more secure. Then he suggested to me on a very small incline, he said, okay, push your knees forward and you'll start to move. So we practiced push the knees forward, move, push the knees forward, move, and I could get into that rhythm. Then he suggested to me, okay, push your right leg in, you're going to turn to the left. Push your knees forward, right leg in, we turned, that worked. Push your left knee in, that worked. Then we practice tipping the tray. Tip the tray to the left, you go to the right, tip the tray to the right, you go to the left, and we practice. Now, meanwhile, I'm watching people go down the hill, and they're like 8 to 80, and they're going down the hill, and they're not tipping the tray, and they're not pushing their knee in, and they're not falling either. But I have to think that if this ski instructor is intelligent enough to break things down into rudimentary skills, that pretty soon I, by virtue of practicing those rudimentary skills, will get the whole package. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by working in pairs, and we're going to do a little bit of an addiction exercise. So what I would like you to do is to pick somebody who you don't know and will never see again as your partner. And then what I want you to do is to think of any addiction that you have that is negative in your life. And then, and Lillian will be okay, and she'll do this, right? And so she'll think of one addiction that she has that's negative in her life, troublesome in her life. And it could be a very severe addiction, and it could be a very mild addiction, but something that's real, that's troubling her in her life. And then what she's going to do is to think of one dimension of that addiction, not the totality of the addiction, but just one dimension of the addiction.
What do you mean?
Oh, like, one dimension of the addiction could be a craving or a behavior or an attitude or relationship pattern, just a dimension of the addiction, trying not to take the addiction in totality, but dividing it down into a component. Could you do it?
Yeah,
You can?
I think it's easy.
Too easy. Okay, and then what Lillian is going to do is she's going to transform herself and sculpt herself into a representation of the dimension of that addiction. So she's going to be living art. Okay, so think of a dimension of any addiction that you have that's real and that's troubling to you. Think of one dimension of that addiction, and then sculpt yourself into a posture that represents that as if you were a statue. Okay, I'm a statue. I don't represent anything. Say to me, okay, Jeff, represent thinking. I represent thinking. We could all agree that that represents a thoughtful posture. You could say represent being loving, and I could move into a sculpture that would represent being loving. I could say represent being frustrated, and I could take a posture and I'd be a statue that represents being frustrated. Okay. Okay, stop. And just hold it. And we'll stop. Okay, so now please do the same. Find a partner, and then I would do the same thing. So I do the same thing with Lillian. I find one addiction. I represent a facet of that addiction. Lillian is there. I'm going to represent a facet of that addiction. I did it. Stop there. Yes. Say that again? Like charades, but no, you don't get it. No classification, not trying to get it. Just live the experience for the moment and see that you can put yourself into a representation of that, that dimension. No charade.
It's much more for the person who is doing it to experience. It's much more for the person who is doing it to connect with the feeling of that, the internal experience of that particular thing that we are talking about, that dimension, and just like getting in touch with that. We usually talk about things, we don't bring problems to our office, and this is a good way of bringing the experience, bringing the soul of the person to the experience of therapy.
Right. Just stay with the experience, don't analyze it, just be with it. Yes?
Sorry, you said we're doing this for half an hour, right?
Not half an hour. We're going. This is exercise 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay.
This is going to just this piece will take 30 seconds each. Okay? So please find somebody who you don't know and will never see again. I recommend that you stand and do this. Okay.
Your instruction make me, first of all, well, I cannot easily respond to this and doing what you require because I started thinking about my addictions.
Yeah.
Started to meditate, to reflect upon my addiction. And the point is that probably it depends on the viewpoint. I feel rather I suppose I have some addiction, but I feel quite comfortable with them.
Yes.
And it's a matter of perspective. So I don't experience it as addiction,
Dissonance.
but someone probably
Else.
by an observer can say, yes, you're sure addicted. Well, but I don't experience it as something like
Then,
this.
you know.
What would you say? How would you define addiction? It's something I must experience as addiction, or if I don't feel it as it, it's not an addiction.
If you
So both things are not as precise.
let me say that to the group.
I just
Let me respond in the group. Okay. Think about this as an assessment device. Well, one thing is that we all have some addictions. And that is not bad for us as therapists to get in touch with the fact that we are not free from addictions and that our life is, we're unevolved, not completely evolved people, and we're always involved in the process of our own evolution. Second thing to think about is that I asked you to do this exercise in pairs, and because you're doing it in relationship to somebody. Now, this immediately becomes a projective exercise. The way in which Lillian did her sculpture in relationship to me, and the way I did my sculpture in relationship to her, is a projective exercise. You do this in a relational field. Now, a third thing about this is that imagine a patient coming into your office, and the patient says, I've got an addiction, which could be however they define it, or a habit, however they define it. And even if they don't necessarily define it as being troublesome. My wife says I am addicted to alcohol. I don't think so. Right? So this is another problem because how we define addiction, so these become so egosyntonic that we don't even necessarily realize that this is a problem unless somebody taps us on the shoulder and says, by the way, you got a problem, which is why people have to do an intervention in order to talk with the addicted person who shrouds themselves in some kind of denial. You know, I don't know, it might be a problem for other people, but it's not a problem for me. Okay, so now imagine the person comes in with their addiction, and suddenly, as a therapist, rather than saying, tell me about your addiction, you say to the person, you know, I really want to know what your addiction is like. Can you sculpt me into a representation of your addiction? And you immediately get out of your chair, and rather than being Rogerian and being cognitive behavioral and having the series of questions and asking people about their addiction, you sculpt yourself. And you say to the patient, please sculpt me into a representation. I just realized that I did this exercise wrong. We can correct it, because I didn't think it through clearly enough. So what I should have done in the pair is I should have said, Lillian, I don't.
It can be one step and then we go to the
We go to the other step. Yeah, that's okay. We'll do that in the next exercise. Sculpt me into a representation of your addiction. And then the person can get a visual representation of the problem that they bring in. Now, they're just going to give you a verbal representation of the problem anyway, but this way they get a visual representation of the problem. And if it's a couple, you can do this with the couple, or you can do this by taking it on yourself. I would advise you to play with it in the sense of taking it on yourself, especially if you already have experience in sculpting and using sculptures. Have the therapist sculpt the problem. And we'll do this for the next exercise. And then take on that sculpture. Now, to me, because the first... Yeah.
Have the therapist...
Take on... So Lillian comes back here, right? And Lillian has given a representation, right? So it's like Lillian is the patient, so Lillian's sitting down. It's okay. So I want to understand something about your addiction. Think of one dimension of your addiction. Sculpt me into a representation of that dimension.
No.
How did I do?
No.
Okay, so please.
This hand down.
This hand down.
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 Okay. Uh-huh.
And the other one is just like you are getting something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Moving forward?
Grabbing something.
Like I'm grabbing
Yeah,
something?
about to grab something.
About to grab something?
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm smiling?
Yes, and the
Uh-huh.
mouth a little open.
Little open mouth?
Yeah.
Okay. Uh-huh. We're not interpreting. It's not the interpretation. Uh-huh. So, okay, so is that a adequate representation? Right?
It's a marketing tool for Hershey's, for God's sake. It's a commercial for Hershey's.
It's a commercial for Hershey's. Uh-huh.
Hershey's Kisses.
So by virtue of doing this, this is going to be something that we can build on, and in many ways. Lily and I got a gift from Ernest Rossi and his wife Catherine, and the gift is a book. And the book is The Picture Perfect Diet. And it's so cool. And on the left-hand side of the page, you have a black and white cookie. Now, when I was a boy, I would have committed a minor misdemeanor to get a black and white cookie because those were my favorite cookies. So there's a black and white cookie, beautiful graphic picture of a black and white cookie. Underneath it is an equal sign, and underneath that is 620 calories. On the right side of the page, you look, and there is 2 yogurt cones, 6 chocolate sticks, 4 pieces of hard candy, and a very large plate of fruit. And underneath that, it says 620 calories. And so this side, 1 black and white cookie. This side, you see the picture. On the next page, there's a scone. And underneath the scone, equal sign, 730 calories. And then on the next page, you see a breakfast that, Andre the Giant couldn't eat because it's just a huge amount of food, granola and all kinds of things that you could eat. And underneath that, it says 730 calories.
You never eat a cookie in the same way in your life again.
Right. Because the picture is worth 1,000 calories. And we know that words and the recall of words is contingent on IQ. So if you have 150 IQ, you're going to memorize verbal concepts much better than 100 IQ. But we know that visual recognition is independent of IQ. And it's not going to be affected very much by IQ. So what we want to do is to initiate a process of using people's visual system and create an image that we will then be able to modify. And even more, because Rogers was a demigod, one of the first gods to me of psychotherapy, I think this is consummately Rogerian. That rather than asking the person and says, well, you know, seems like a drag that you've got this problem or that this problem is troubling you, that suddenly you take on a representation and you really experience some aspect of that person's problem. And this is visual empathy, experiential empathy, if you will, not verbal empathy, but you are really empathizing by stepping into that person's reality and some aspect of the person's reality.
And I think also, can I add one thing?
Please.
Sometimes people are just talking about problems rationally, and they're not just, the problem is not there. So the sculpting, when the client do the sculpting, they bring the problem to the present situation. And on the other hand, there are some clients that they think that they are the problem. I am depressed. I am a drug addict, or whatever it is. So in those situations, it's good to have an externalization of the problem, and it's good to the therapist to do the sculpting.
Yeah. So this is like from Michael White, narrative therapy, externalize the problem. This is another slant on externalizing the problem. Okay, so now we go to step number 2 here, and we'll just wing it a little bit, make it up as we go along. So I'm going to go back into this, right? And I'm, there, right? And I'm inside your sculpture. How am I doing? Okay. And then I'm going to describe to you what it feels like to be inside the sculpture. Right?
Your eyes need to smile.
My eyes need to smile. Okay. Well, help me to get there. Is there anything else I need to do?
Yeah. No, that's
okay.
That's not good. Yeah.
My eyes are smiling.
Yeah.
Okay. So my internal experience as I'm doing this is that I am tremendously focused. Like there's nothing else in the room. I can't see anybody. I can't hear anything else. I'm just tremendously focused. I can only vaguely even see my hand. It's just like a blurry object because I'm just so focused. And I am off balance. And I'm poised, but all of my weight is on my right foot. And I'm a little breathless. Like I'm not fully supporting myself with air. And I've got a pain over here. So it feels to me like, although my left side is moving, it feels to me like my right side is pulling back somehow. So that's my experience of myself when I'm inside the sculpture. How does that fit?
If you eat the chocolate, you will not feel any of the bad things.
If I ate the chocolate, I wouldn't feel any of the bad things. I see. Until after. So that fits somewhat with your experience.
And it's interesting the feedback that you gave me about, the part.
The feedback is interesting.
Yeah, that you said about, the part that is pulling back and the tension that is in there. Yeah, there is.
There is. Okay, so then please, what I would like you to do is to recapitulate that exercise. So Lillian is doing it with me, right? So you switch.
Okay.
Switch. You can take this, right?
I guess.
Okay, so then you're doing my sculpture.
What it was?
It's like.
Okay.
Remember?
So should I go this way or I can do this way?
Yes.
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 Like
With your
this?
knees bent a little bit,
Okay.
and a little bit more weight on your front foot, and a little bit more, a little bit more like your body's more. Yeah.
Okay.
Excellent.
How about my face? What should I do with my face?
That's it.
Like,
What you're doing with your face
like
is...
this?
Exactly right.
Okay.
Okay, great. So now help me, what's your experience as you're doing my sculpture?
It's just there is like a discomfort. When I put my face like this, it's just like a discomfort.
Maybe you can...
Oh yeah, so it's just like, when I put my face like this, it's just like a tension and discomfort and out of balance, and a pain in my stomach.
Pain in your stomach?
Yeah, a pain in my stomach. And I don't breathe well, but, and my lower back starts hurting, but it's mostly the pain in my stomach. And there is something of a disgust in my, that my face brings me, a feeling of disgust and doubt. That's how I feel, being here.
Fantastic. Okay, so can you do that? Take your partner. This time, take on your partner's sculpture and be the sculpture that you saw your partner do, and then say something about what is your experience in doing that sculpture, and then stop there.
Was there something you faced the other way, in your sculpture, you turned your back?
Yes, I turned my back.
For your own privacy or?
No, that was the way that I wanted to do my sculpture. That was what I wanted to represent as I did my sculpture. Reality and hallucinating what you would be like in that phenomenological reality. Now, this is my projection, right? I go into Lillian's reality, right? And when I go into Lillian's reality, I feel pain in my shoulder, and I feel this. Now, that's a projection from me. I don't know that that has anything to do with her experiential reality. When she goes into my sculpture and she starts to feel discomfort in her stomach, that doesn't have necessarily anything to do with my experiential reality. That's her projection of what she feels like in the sculpture. And yet, the information can be valuable and can coincide with what the person's reality is. Doesn't necessarily, but can. And then there was something else that you were going to mention about that? Describing? Nope. Oh, okay. So, Herman?
Interestingly, I found breaking it up into a component
Uh-huh.
incredibly difficult, and then to sculpt it,
Uh-huh.
which probably says more that I'm far more verbal than I need to be, because I found it fairly easy to describe it. But it found it very, very difficult to actually sculpt it and breaking it into a component, and what are the dimensions of the addiction.
Yeah, so the comment is about breaking it up into a dimension and the difficulty of breaking it up into a dimension rather than taking on the totality. I would much, much prefer to sculpt a dimension. And this is because of my obsession about dividing things into component parts, perhaps because of Erickson's work with me and my pipe smoking. I'm teasing, but the idea of taking things into their systemically significant components. The mentality is what is the smallest change that will make a systemic difference. And so rather than taking things on as a whole, I would much prefer to take things on dimensionally and to sculpt some dimension. You know, like I could sculpt a dimension of my problem. I could sculpt the dimension of my relationship to Lillian when I am doing my addiction, which coincidentally I did. I made sure that my sculpture was in relationship to Lillian. And so that says something about the nature of my addiction. I could sculpt the behavioral aspect. I could sculpt the emotional aspect. I could sculpt the existential aspect. I could sculpt something about the cognitive aspect.
Or the impact or
or the
problem.
impact.
The impact of the problem in the family or in the relationship that you are in.
Right. So now we have enough material for, if not an entire initial session, pretty close. Now, I'm a little bit pixelated here on the time because of the way in which things were structured and the time it took to put up the walls and get started. So I think that there's a break that's happening that we might have just missed. But at least we could catch up on the tail end of that break, and then we could come back to doing this kind of exercise, which was that until this moment I hadn't realized that I went out during the break and I was hunting for chocolate.
You got my addiction?
I absorbed
Give me
your
back.
addiction. But instead, I brought back mango juice.
What?
Instead, I brought back mango juice. Yeah. That was so interesting. Okay, so you do this sculpture, right? You get in touch, and Herman was saying that just the idea alone of getting in touch with a dimension of the addiction, not taking on the addiction in its totality, but getting in touch with the dimension of it is very interesting. And then once you can get that, and once you can express it and feel it from the inside, what I hope that you begin to do, making assessment into an intervention, is that you start, by this process of externalizing, to contaminate the addiction a little bit, so that this picture becomes a little bit of a caricature of the addiction. And if this person starts to go into their addiction, that suddenly, in a way that's like a post-hypnotic suggestion. When I make this sound, you'll scratch your head. Right? That's a classic post-hypnotic suggestion. But not in that sense, much more naturalistically, that when the person starts to go into their addiction, suddenly they have a hallucination. And they're seeing you and remembering your description. Now, is that systemically significant? I don't know. Could it be systemically significant? Yes. So what intervention can we make that will start to contaminate the system, that will be a little bit of a computer virus that begins to dissolve some part of the problem?
Adler would call that spitting in the soup.
Yes, mosaic, right.
Referred to Rogers twice, I figured I have to throw it out.
Yes, spitting in the patient's soup, right? This is a concept, an Adlerian concept. Herman has a Chicago Adlerian kind of background and orientation. So Adler had this mentality, spit in the patient's soup. If you spit in your own soup, suddenly the most delicious and expensive lobster bisque becomes very unpalatable. Now, it's your own saliva, right? But just the idea of it makes it unpalatable. So what is a kind of catalyst for change? The catalyst is not going to be changed, but the reaction is going to happen much quicker by virtue of having the catalyst. So you hope that by doing a little bit of a caricature, making a little bit garish or a little bit unusual, that this is going to somehow get caught in the person's mind, and as they start to do their addiction, suddenly they are going to see this image of you playing it out. Okay? Let's do another part, and maybe two parts with this, so that we can hurry up this exercise a little bit, because I suddenly had the feeling that we could spend all afternoon on this exercise alone and do it valuably, but there are some other pieces that I would like to get us to. Okay, so I'm doing your addiction, right? I go back into doing your addiction, and then I'm there, and I'm doing your addiction, and I'm focused, and I feel a little bit of that pull, and I'm so attentive, and I'm reaching, and I'm grasping, and I'm moving forward to that addiction. And then, please, put a title over this. Fascination.
Fascination.
Okay, so it's as if you're placing a title over the sculpture, and the title of the sculpture is Fascination. And you can imagine me into that sculpture with the title Fascination. Okay, so now, suggest to me something that I could do that would, as I had conceived the exercise, I was going to do it in parts. Now we're putting a couple of the parts together. One part, put the title. Next part, what could you suggest to me that I could do with the sculpture that would make the sculpture worse? Make worse in the sense of increasing the intensity of the sculpture.
Okay.
Right? So,
Go back
so
there.
I go into the sculpture. What could I do that would make it worse?
So do this with the hand instead of do this as if you're just grabbing,
Okay.
almost
So-
grabbing.
Like a little pincher, like
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
Okay. Okay, so then I'm doing this with the intent of making the sculpture worse. Imagine the title, Fascination,
Yeah.
and tell me how the title changes when I change the sculpture.
Oh, your eyes change a little bit and your
Okay,
mouth.
so
Yeah.
do I want to change my eyes back?
No, yeah.
Oh,
put
yeah,
it, put
I
it back.
did change my eyes.
No, yeah, you change your eyes, but your eyes should be smiling and your mouth.
I don't know, because when I did that, suddenly, unconsciously, my eyes just changed. Okay, so I'll go back to it. So I'm smiling. Okay.
Okay.
It's a good thing we're making a DVD of this, but I want to see the copy before you release it. Okay.
How the title changes.
Does it change the title when I do this, when I make that movement with my hand?
Yeah. I don't know. The only thing that comes to my mind is almost there.
What?
Almost there.
Almost there. Or it could be very fascinated, or it could be completely fascinated, complete fascination, or it could be reaching for fascination. How could the title change to represent the new sculpture? By making it worse,
I told you. Almost there.
almost there.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So that becomes the title now. Okay. So, should we take it one step further? I think take it one step further. Okay, so now if I take the sculpture and I come back to its original form, right? Tell me one thing that I can do. What's a small thing that I can do? And now we're thinking about JND in both of these sculptures. JND, just noticeable difference. The field of psychology started in 1857 when Wundt established his laboratory in Leipzig, and the job of that introspection was to measure sensation and perception. Could you have an equation that would measure sensation and perception? And so what they did was they would, take an object, they would put it in someone's hand. Can you feel this? Yes. And so then they would take another object. Can you feel this now? No. Can you feel this now? Yes. So what is a just noticeable difference? And they were trying to measure what's a just noticeable difference in sensation? What's a just noticeable difference in perception? And the field of psychology started by measuring introspectively these just noticeable differences. And then, of course, moved in many other directions since then. But what we're trying to do is a just noticeable difference. Get the sculpture, right? Describe it. Get the sculpture, put a title on it. Make it worse. How does that change the title? You know that it makes it worse when the title changes. If the title doesn't change, then do something else to make it worse until that changes the title. So we want there to be another symbolic representation on a different level. Then go back into the sculpture. Okay, do something that makes it less bad or better. Something that makes it less of an addiction. What's a small change that you can make that will change the title, fascination, and make it a little bit better?
No, it was funny because when you almost there, the fascination was just gone. So it's just like,
Almost there,
yeah, it's just
didn't
like
have that level of fascination.
No, did not. So it was funny, yeah.
Yeah, somebody got the Nobel Prize for that concept. Which is true. That our expectations, once met, are never as robust as they were when they were at the level of expectations, when they're realized we're not as happy as we expect ourselves to be. Okay, so come back to that, right? Here I am in the sculpture. What can I do that would make it just a little bit better, a little bit less problematic? Is that clear?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
What? Oh yeah, I can look to something else.
Okay.
Good, look at me.
Okay, so I look at you. Okay. That's a
I'm
big
sorry.
shift.
I said, she said, look at other, some other direction. I said, it's a good idea. And I asked him to look at me.
So this is a good therapeutic suggestion, right? That's like a therapist coming in and saying, okay, let's do an experiment. Let's have you do an experiment. Change the sculpture by just looking at me, or looking at your wife, or whoever else happens to be in the room. Okay, so all that I do is I've got the sculpture. I keep the expression, right? I turn towards you.
I like that.
Okay, so now, what title would you put on the sculpture?
Love.
What?
Love.
Love.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so,
Smile a lot more spontaneous.
and my smile was better, and so was hers. Okay, so play that in those couple of ways, please.
That wasn't a just noticeable difference.
Say that again.
It seemed to me that that was bigger than just noticeable.
That was a bigger than just noticeable difference.
So
It
is
was
that okay?
bigger.
Like if she said just
was okay.
step your hand back, is that okay?
It was okay. Yeah, truthfully, the way that you were suggesting it is even better. It would be better if
I don't think so.
No? Well, if the intervention came from the outside rather than from the person.
No, it was interesting is that when the client or the person is stuck, we can come in and help. That is so I was I didn't know exactly where to go, and then you made, yeah. So you made so you helped me to get unstuck of that. And so when you do that, I can either accept that or come up with some other variables, choices.
I mean, conceptually, the idea of the just noticeable difference, it seems to me that the point of that
is to not make a big change.
Exactly.
Because it's directional. All you care about is movement in that direction. If the patient or client can tolerate a bigger movement, that's fine.
Exactly right.
But you don't want to stress them. It's the gradient of intervention. So
That's
any
right.
little tiny thing,
The point is any tiny
any little
thing.
tiny thing, if it's in a different direction, is going to make potentially a big change.
That's exactly the
Yeah.
point. The snowballing effect. That was very well said.
Very well said. And I would say that once she said that, I gave a meaning to what he was doing that, that had an effect for me. So instead of just looking for the smallest thing, I was looking for something that was meaningful for me. And you have to adapt to, what is better for each client. Sometimes they need just a small little thing, and sometimes they just need to just change completely to something that is meaningful for them. So we just go.
Although for the vast majority of the time, when I was with Erickson, 6.5 years of spending time intermittently with Erickson, the last 2 years before he died, I lived in Phoenix and effectively took over Erickson's private practice. In the time that I spent with him, although what you saw and you read in the cases sounded like Erickson was this person who was just, suddenly you would make these giant steps into health. Really, my experience of being with Erickson was like, he was saying to me, okay, Jeff, well, can you do this? And it was just a little step, and I'd say, well, yeah. And then he would say, well, then you could do this. And I'd say, well, sure. And he would say, well, this would follow, yeah. And then this would seem logical too, yeah. So then you might as well try this. And suddenly I would be in a different place, and I wouldn't know how I got there. But it was invariable that the steps were just so small. And that's like hypnosis. Like you can feel your hand resting now on your lap, and you may begin to notice the sensations, and I don't know how those sensations can begin to develop. And you may notice the sensations can turn into actual movement, and that movement can begin to have a direction. And it can be so fascinating to notice how that hand can want to just move. Just dee-dee-dee. And so from studying hypnosis, it's that process of just small changes. Don't ask for too much. The smallest increment of change. And if this person can make large changes, so much the better.
Have people been thinking about the way the brain overpredicts danger?
That's interesting. The way the brain overpredicts danger.
That the primitive brain is designed to overpredict danger.
The primitive brain is designed to overpredict. Yes.
Yes. Post-traumatic stress,
Yes.
example,
Yes.
is that the primitive brain, you see a wiggly thing on the path.
Right.
You only want to see it once. And then all wiggly things on the path become dangerous.
Yes.
And so we define them as dangerous.
Yes. The generalization.
The primitive brain is not designed for a safe, loving environment. But
Right.
What it seems to, it goes to the level where, as I'm listening to you talk, I'm thinking, by deconstructing this, you're also deconstructing the globalizations associated with identity, like badness, Like the experience of shame, as an example, is
Right.
one where I am bad. But you don't have to do something awful to experience it. All you have to do is want to kiss the girl and have her turn her head away. Do you know what I'm saying? Because it's all part of this. And so when I'm listening to you talk about breaking it into little pieces, it's like you're breaking up that process of globalization
I like it.
that we call identity.
Uh-huh.
But unfortunately with patients, the identity is always a negative up there.
Yes.
And also, in the same way that you're
I hope
saying
you
that.
heard that because it was a very interesting comment. And
Another way of saying that is that, your more developed areas of your brain can take over and not just let for the reptilian and other, so when you do that, yeah.
Constantly coaching it.
Yeah.
Coaching the frontal lobe,
Yes.
to mediate
Yeah.
the activation in different ways.
Exactly.
I was looking. Why don't you see if you can reach that microphone over there so we could.
This microphone, I don't know.
What's occurring to me is that, I mean, especially working with addicts, there's a tendency for want of immediate gratification, right? They always want to make the bigger moves first, right? If they can, oh, well, let's just alter, they'll do the whole thing. So bringing them back to that is the teaching of this bit by bit process and the slow change, because you want to have something that's profound and will have that long-lasting effect, that long-lasting abstinence, not just the right now I'm okay and I'm holding on, and right now, like, okay, I can do this big thing right now, but is it going to be enough to change the system, like Jeff is talking about? And in order to do that, you have to get the little pieces. So I'm wondering how much of a change in that sculpture, because that was, I mean, we all observed that was far more than a just noticeable difference to turn the head so drastically, right? So how much do you bring them along with the little pieces versus exploring that that bigger jump, right? Do you see where I'm going with this?
Do you want to answer that, or? Let me just explain, here. So when he was, there was a big movement. But for me, what happened was that when he turned to me, I said, when I'm in my addiction thing, I'm alone. And usually I do that. I just go to my cave and I just don't look for anyone. And I'm very introspective. So when he did that I grab a meaning of, that is not only addiction to chocolate. It's just, I need to look for people more and for relationships more. So that whole meaning just, it was an insight for me that is just, okay, so that was a piece that tells me about my relationships in the world.
And the essence of that would be that the dynamic experience precedes the dynamic understanding. That first you get the experience and you generate the insight. The person will generate the insight. The insight is stimulated from the inside out rather than it's the person giving you the insight. We are compelled to tell the moral of the story. And in this Ericksonian manner, I don't want to tell the moral of the story. I want to just give the person the experience and let them tell me the moral of the story.
I mean, in terms of what these guys just did, I mean, you could, because you have a background in treating addiction, I gather, right? And if you just think about it for a second, what they did there was they made something that was like gratifying into relationally gratifying, something that was isolating into something that was relational in that moment, which is exactly what we're always doing with addicts. I mean, and ourselves, by the way. So it's kind of like, to me, it would be like, what do I do on Thursday night when I'm craving alcohol, I'm craving a joint, I'm craving whatever? And the answer is call your sponsor. If you're working a 12-step program. Well, the answer is go to a meeting. Meaning, go find some love. Because that's what you're really after. That's what you're really trying to get.
Yeah.
And in that moment,
right.
where, and I don't know if chocolate's an addiction or not, but it is isolating.
Right. But if
for me, I don't know if it's for everybody. I know that it's for me. So that is a meaning, that was meaningful for me. So when he did that.
The simplicity of the insight, right? It's just, a problem is that we know, but we don't necessarily realize what we know. And so rather than giving people more information that they'll know, I want to create situations where people will have more realizations of what they already know. They already know that instead of being addicted and isolated with their substance, that they can make connection, but they don't realize it.
Yeah.
And so the insight and the experience allows them to empower what they know into what they realize. Just one quick piece. This the idea of tote. The way that we group our experience changes our understanding. It's a little bit related to what you're saying, but not perfectly. Okay, so if I say to you, memorize the following letters: I, B, M, U, S, A, F, B, I, R, C, A, C, I, A, B, M, W. Right? Suddenly that becomes a problem unless you happen to have a fabulous visual memory. Okay, watch. Right? IBM, USA, FBI, RCA, CIA, BMW. Now suddenly it becomes much easier to handle, but all that we did was to change the constellation. Except changing the constellation makes a world of difference in your ability to manipulate the concept and to get the concept. So making a small change in the grouping can create a lot of ease in manipulating and handling the concept. Talked about Rossi. I'm deaf, so it's better if I come close. I don't mean to.
With the synaptogenesis.
Right, with Rossi's work,
And what you're
creating novelty, and that novelty creates gene expression and turns on these genes. And what we need is novelty. And psychotherapy has now become so infused into the proper culture that we need to create some novelty to keep psychotherapy alive. And we want to build these synaptic connections within the therapist.
Right. And blah, 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 blah.
Right.
But I think from a more simple perspective is you're talking about the just noticeable difference.
Yes.
Is just by that, there's a new connection.
That's right.
And so it creates that, and then again, the whole system changes. But
And that's right.
It's nice to see how even on that, from the neurosciences, what they're coming up with.
And the neurosciences support the validity. Yep.
What strikes me about the just noticeable difference is, say in an addiction or a habit, the complaint is, I can't help it.
The complaint is I can't help it.
Yeah, it's beyond me.
Uh-huh.
The habit or the addiction is something I can't help. But then when asked to do a just noticeable difference, just almost the tinier the difference, the more you have to stop and think about it.
Right.
And then you've just completely challenged the whole notion that I can't do anything about this.
Right.
Because here now you have to do something about it, but only by a millimeter.
Right. So when Erickson did that thing with me with smoking, he was using my conscious mind against my unconscious mind. So suddenly I didn't know what to do if I picked up a pipe. I had pipe smoking. And to me, pipe smoking was one thing. But Erickson didn't have to accept that pipe smoking was one thing. He could understand that it was made up of a whole bunch of components, and that if he could destabilize that system and have me look at it in a different way by just breaking it up into so many component parts that it became, I didn't know what to do. In addition, he's going pipe, awkward, pipe, awkward, pipe, awkward. And if there's anybody at that age that I didn't want to be awkward around, it was Milton Erickson.
So what you couldn't help, what you couldn't stop doing was somehow thinking about.
The association that he made.
Yeah.
The association that he made. So pipe, awkward.
Plus
and then he got contaminated with that.
Plus the dividing things into small parts, and like asking the centipede, how do you move leg number 43? Okay, so I would be glad if they did the exercise, but we're into dialogue. Okay, so let's do the exercise. Is that okay? Because I think that there's one piece to be learned from doing it that we can't describe so consciously, and it would be worthwhile. So it's the idea of taking on the person sculpture, getting a title, okay, then make the problem worse, see if that changes the title, then do something to make the problem better, see how that changes the title, and then stop at that point. Is that okay? Okay, so please take 5 minutes to do that. In terms of whatever directives or insights they get about it, and how you will begin to have a better understanding of the other person's experiential reality by virtue of playing out the sculpture. Now, there's no problem with having the person move into their own sculpture. It's not that the therapist is locked into the idea of having to do the sculpture. You can ask the patient to do the sculpture. You can ask the patient to extend that process by virtue of doing the sculpture of the goals that they have for themselves. How is it that they want it to be? So working with a young man who was stopping smoking, and I was using this method of sculpting, sculpt me into the urge to smoke. Take a dimension of the smoking. So he sculpted me into the urge. And so I got the feeling of what it was like and how he experienced it and started adding some things to that. And then I wanted to, because the mentality of stopping an addiction is hard. And so rather than having to take away something, you want to present what are you going to get, what's the benefit. It's not that you're going to lose something, you're going to evolve something or gain something. So he would sculpt himself into the image of how he was wanting to be. And then I could step into that sculpture and I could feel it. And then I could start describing it. And I could start, building that state and adding things to that that would help him to flesh out what his goal state was. And then you have the mentality that suddenly therapy becomes an improvisational art. And you are making small moments come alive. And then you are doing something that will obviate therapist burnout. It's going to be very hard for you to burn out because it's going to be harder for you to burn out because you're going to be reinventing yourself and you're going to be reinventing the therapy moment to moment. So the therapy becomes play. The therapist's office becomes a stage. The stage becomes a symbol drama of change. And this is my definition of psychotherapy. Psychotherapy is a symbol drama, the imperative of which is by living this experience, you will be different. Now, I did a book called What is Psychotherapy, where I asked 50 experts, 80 experts, exactly, 83 experts, to give their definition of psychotherapy. And they had to give a capsule definition and a critique statement and a explication. And then my co-author and I tried to parse it down and have a generic definition of psychotherapy, which was practically an impossible task because you couldn't agree on what is a unit of change. Is the unit of change behavior, relationship, affect, biology, structure? What is the unit of change? Transpersonal issues? So there's no, imagine trying to form a science of physics where you can't have people agree that electrons and neutrons and positrons are the essential units from which you build physics. You can't do that in psychotherapy because if you have 80 experts from different schools and they are trying to indicate what is essential to human change, it's just not possible. So when we are doing psychotherapy, we're stuck with the idea of inventing our own definition for what it is that we're doing. I foist my definition on you. Psychotherapy is a symbol drama, the imperative of which is by living this experience, you'll be different. Get out of the chair, create an experience that appeals to the person's eyes, start a momentum that will catalyze change, and begin the symbol drama by moving in this small series of concerted steps, all of which will hopefully build into strategic difference. Other ways that you want to summarize our use of sculpting? So Lily and I are building on this, and this becomes one cornerstone around which we do the assessment.